Good morning, everybody. So there's only a few of you on the webcast today, and I was thinking why, and realized it's the Friday before Memorial Day. So congratulations to those of us who are actually at work. And for your reward, this is the best webinar of all of them. So you get the best one. So there you are. So today we're talking about how understanding human behavior can hopefully help us work better together. And what we're working today from is a concept that is in the Myers-Briggs type inventory, and it's based upon the work of psychologist Carl Jung. And what I'd like you to do is to take a pencil or a pen or whatever you have available to you, and I'd like you to sign your name on a piece of paper, on your PowerPoint, whatever you'd like to do. Sign your name how you always sign your name. And now I'd like you to put your writing instrument in your other hand and sign your name so it looks just the same. You're probably still struggling to do that, and that's okay. I'm going to keep talking while you do it. What Carl Jung said is that we are born with predispositions to behave certain way. And the reason that I had you write your name different ways is because when I asked you to write your name the first time, probably you picked up your pencil or your pen with the hand that you always use, and you signed your name how you always do, and it didn't take very much thought whatsoever or energy or concentration in order to sign your name. When I asked you to put your pen or pencil in your other hand, that probably made you pause for a minute. When you were signing your name, you probably had to really think about it, and it probably looks pretty awkward. It probably felt awkward. And that's what we're talking about when we're saying inborn predispositions. You're predisposed to use the hand that you always use. Now, if you were born left-handed and somebody said you shouldn't be left-handed, you need to be right-handed, and they forced you to write right-handed, then you didn't have that predisposition to be right-handed. But for most of us, we write with the hand that comes naturally to us, and we don't have to think about it, and it looks natural when we do it. Well, that's what we're going to talk about today is 4 sets of preferences, and we prefer to behave one way, and sometimes we have to behave another way, such as using our opposite hand, and it feels awkward and it takes a lot of energy to do it, but we can do it if we need to. So when I'm talking about these different preferences, I want you to think about your right hand or your left hand. Which one do you go to more easily, and how do you switch to the other if you need to? So here we go. First of all, newsflash, personality clashes found to be the major cause of workplace conflict. That probably comes as no surprise to you. Our personality styles indicate how we're going to behave. And when we behave differently than other people behave, we tend to have problems. We tend to have clashes. And we tend to think that the way we behave is the correct way to behave. And if people are behaving differently than us, then something is wrong with them. Well, people are thinking the same thing about us too. And unfortunately, we don't really look at it as human behavior and the way that we behave, or the reason we behave the way that we do is because we're predisposed to. We're usually not thinking that. We're just thinking this person is doing things the way I don't like it, and that's wrong. And so we're going to look at why people behave the way they do, why it totally makes sense to them, and what we can do about it if it's different from the way we behave. And the other thing we're going to look at is why we behave the way that we do and how it might be causing conflict for some other people. Because here's a newsflash if you don't know that, you're annoying people all the time. And you don't know it, and perhaps you don't mean to. But when we behave differently than other people do, that causes problems for them as well. And so we're going to look at those clashes in personality styles, and more importantly, what we can do to avoid them or repair them. So the first set of preferences we're going to look at is extroversion and introversion. And you've probably heard of these terms before. They've been around in our vocabulary for a long time. They came from Carl Jung. He wrote a book called Psychological Types in 1920, and it talked about the fact that some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. And what this basically means is the direction in which we focus our attention and energy. Extroverts focus their attention out into the world. Introverts focus their attention to themselves internally. And because of that focus of attention, it makes us behave very different ways. So people who prefer extroversion are attracted to the outer world of people and events. They like to know what's going on, who's doing what's happening, and just be in the know about all of those things. They're aware of who and what is around them. And they're paying a lot of attention to what's going on and who's interacting with who and that type of thing. Now, as a result of that, sometimes people tend to think that they're putting their noses in other people's business, that they're busybodies because they like to talk about what's going on and who's doing what and that type of thing. Sometimes people see them as gossips. And so that presents a problem for them. But they're very focused on what's going on outside of them. And that's what they talk about. They spend a lot of time talking, by the way. They enjoy meeting and talking with new people. And so they meet people really easily and can jabber on just about anything with anyone. They're very friendly, often verbally skilled, so they have the gift for gab. They talk very easily, and they're easy to know because they tend to be disclosive. They tell people a lot about themselves, and that can be a problem for people who are not like that. They tend to speak out easily and often at meetings, and so sometimes it appears that they're hogging the show, that they're talking just to talk, which sometimes extroverts do. And they may not be as aware of what's going on inside themselves because they don't spend a lot of time and energy and focus on what's going on inside themselves. They're spending that time and energy and focus on what's going on outside of themselves. So here's brief information about extroverts, but let me tell you more about them. A lot of times people think that extroverts have to be the life of the party, and you may be saying to yourself, I don't need to be the center of attention, and so therefore I'm probably not extroverted. Not all extroverts are the same, and that's one of the things that we have to be careful about when we're talking about people who fit into this preference, is that we don't label and categorize them, because extroverts come in a variety. There is a scale, and there are people who are slightly extroverted and people who are extremely extroverted, and most people fall in someplace in between those two. And so we have to be careful of thinking that all extroverts need to be the center of attention. All extroverts gab a lot to people that they don't know, that type of thing, because that's not true of all extroverts. What is true of all extroverts is they get their energy from outside themselves, from other people, by being around other people. I'm extroverted. Those of you who know me might know that. And I went back to school a few years ago, and I was working full time and going to school at night. And one of the things I have a tendency to do is to dominate conversations. And I didn't want to do this when I went back to school. Most of my classmates were half my age, and I didn't want to be the annoying person who always doing all of the talking. And so because I went to school at night and worked full time during the day, I was frequently tired by the time I got out there, which was good, because then if I'm tired, maybe I won't dominate the conversations. But I'd get out there and people would start talking and the energy would start flowing and I'd get very energized, and before I knew it, I'd be talking away. That's what happens to extroverts. We get our energy from other people, being around other people, talking about things, and that's what gets us going. Now, on the flip side, extroverts get de-energized when they're not around people or when things aren't happening. So one of my worst weeks has been this week because there's not a lot going on, and there's a lot of being in the office and not communicating with folks. And that is just a drainer of energy for somebody like me. And so extroverts need to be around people, need to be engaged with people, need activity going, action going in order to feel energized. The absence of those things makes them de-energized. And so if you're trying to figure out if you're an extrovert or an introvert, and we'll talk about introverts in just a second, that's the way you figure it out. Do you get your energy by being around people, or do you get your energy by being alone? Now, that's not to say that extroverts never need to be alone. They do. They need time to just be quiet and not talk for a while, some more than others. But for the most part, extroverts get energized by activity and being around people. Introverts, on the other hand, attracted to the inner world of thoughts, feelings, reflections. So they like to spend time alone thinking about deep thoughts, reflecting upon things. They're their own best friend. They're their own best company. They're usually very well aware of what's going on inside themselves because they think about it, they process. Here's one of the differences between extroverts and introverts. Extroverts process information by talking about it. Introverts process information by thinking about it. Extroverts don't even know how they feel sometimes until they hear themselves saying. Introverts know how they feel because they're reflecting upon it. So that's one of the differences between the two as well. Do you need to talk to somebody when something happens to you in order to make yourself feel better about it? Or do you need to be quiet and alone in order to feel better about it? Introverts prefer to interact with people they know. And this is one of the things that happens sometimes. People will say, well, around strangers, I don't like to interact very much, but around people I know, I talk a lot. Does that mean I'm extroverted? No, it means you're comfortable with those people. So introverts usually do not like to meet new people and engage with them, but the people that they know and they're comfortable with, they can be very verbal with and very disclosive with as well. Introverts are often quiet in meetings and seem uninvolved to extroverts. That's one of the areas that cause some conflict is that a lot of time extroverts think if you're not speaking up, you don't care about what we're talking about. And that's not true. Introverts need time to process information. If you ask them a question, they can't have an answer immediately if they haven't thought about it. They usually need to think about things before they put that answer out there. And one of the things, introverts get embarrassed more easily than extroverts do. So when introverts talk and say something, they want to make sure it's just right. Extroverts tend not to think before they speak. That's what gets them in trouble a lot of times. They just blab it out there, and then possibly they think about what they said. Introverts need to think first and then possibly speak. They may not put anything out there at all, especially if somebody else has already said it. For an extrovert, if somebody's already said it, who cares? I'll say it too. Extroverts tend to repeat themselves frequently. Introverts, if they're going to say it, it needs to be just right. And if somebody else has already said it, why say it again? It's already out there. But extroverts tend not to understand that. And so they tend to think that introverts are uninvolved if they're not talking. Introverts are often reserved and harder to get to know. They're not going to disclose a lot of personal information, especially to people they don't know. And sometimes they won't disclose personal information to people they've been married to for years and years. My husband is an introvert, and I know he's going to take things to the grave that he's never told me because he doesn't feel the need to. Extroverts don't understand that. And by the way, that's one of the things that tends to happen is we partner with people who have opposite preferences than us because we balance each other out. And also those differences are very intriguing. And then after a while, they just become annoying. So introverts may not be as aware of the outer world what's going on around them because they're so focused on their interior world. And that causes some problems for extroverts sometimes. Why didn't you pitch in? Why didn't you take care of this? I didn't know it was happening. How could you not know it's happening? Because I was focused on me. So those are some of the differences between extroverts and introverts. There are more that we could dive into, but for the sake of time, we'll just leave it at that. Hopefully you've got a good idea of what those differences are. Now I want to remind you, I've got another slide on extroversion. So let's go to there and then I'll remind you about something else. So extroverts do their thinking as they speak, as I said. They may act and or speak first, then possibly think, as I said. They just blab it out there and then possibly think about what they've just said. They tell you about themselves speaking rapidly. So, as I said, they're pretty disclosive, and their speaking pattern usually is pretty fast, sometimes too fast for the introvert. They give breadth to life, so they know a little bit about a lot of stuff. They get bored and restless if they're alone too long or if there's no activity going on. And they can seem shallow and intruding to introverts. The shallowness is that they like to talk about themselves a lot, and so that seems pretty shallow. Or the shallowness is they know a little bit about a lot of stuff, and so that seems shallow. And intruding to introverts is that they're not only telling you about themselves, but they want to know about you, and so sometimes their questioning seems intrusive to introverts. And they need introversion for balance, and so there you go. That's why we tend to marry them. Introverts need time to gather their thoughts before speaking, as I said before. They reflect and think before possibly acting, so that's one of the things that causes frustration for extroverts sometimes, is that introverts need to think and think and think before they do, if they do at all. They want to know you before self-disclosing. They become drained and tired interacting with people, particularly strangers. Introverts can go to networking activities and mix it up a little bit, but then they need to go home and read a book or just be quiet for a long time. If an extrovert goes to a networking activity, it usually energizes them even more. An introvert, it drains them of energy. They give depth to life because they know a lot about a few things that interest them. And with an introvert, if you get them talking about something that interests them, they usually can talk for a long time about it. You just have to ask them the right question. That's one of the things that an introvert revealed to me in a workshop, is that, yes, I've got a wealth of information that I'll tell you about, but you have to ask me the right question. I said, how do I know what the right question is? You just got to hit upon it. They can seem withdrawn and secretive to extroverts. Why do they seem secretive? Because they don't reveal everything that's going on. And if you find out about something that's going on and they didn't tell you about it, if you're extroverted, you don't understand how they didn't tell you. They must be keeping secrets from you. Not necessarily so. And they need extroversion for balance. So now, here we go. We all do extroverted things and we all do introverted things. So it's not all one or the other. It's just, where do you get your energy? By being around other people or by being by yourself? What are some of the clashes as a result of that? Well, I pointed them out along the way, but let's point them out again. Clash for introverts when it comes to interacting with extroverts. Extroverts talk too much. They're too loud. A lot of times extroverts have loud voices. They reveal too much information. And if you're an extrovert married to an introvert, you probably embarrass your introverted spouse frequently by revealing personal information. You probably don't think it's personal, but they do. What else do extroverts do to drive introverts crazy? They don't like quiet, and they feel in silences. I have a very extroverted friend who was talking to my very introverted father, and it was one of the most painful conversations I've ever witnessed. My extroverted friend said, "So, Bob, how are you?" Now, my dad needs to think about how he is before he puts it out there. So he's thinking about it. So there's a little bit of a pause. And that's what happens with introverts, is that they pause before responding to make sure that they're providing the correct information. My friend doesn't like pauses. They make her anxious. So she jumped in. I mean, how's business? Is business good? Well, here's a new question that he needs to think about. So there's a pause, and she's uncomfortable with the pause. So she jumps in again. I mean, has the recession hurt you too bad? Well, here's a new question that he needs to think about. So finally, they parted ways, and my friend said to me, "Your dad is so hard to talk to." And I said, "He probably thinks the same thing about you." She said, "I'm very easy to talk to." And I said, "No, you talk easily. You didn't give him the opportunity to talk." So we're not friends anymore, but that's okay. I've got a really great example for training. How do introverts drive extroverts crazy? They don't talk. They don't speak up. They don't reveal how they're feeling. They don't want to go to the party. They don't want to interact. They don't want to disclose. So all of those things cause problems for each other at work. And one of the things at work, especially, extroverts tend to think that introverts are standoffish and think that they're too good for everybody else because they're not joining the party. And that's not necessarily true. So what can we do about all of this? Well, when you're talking to people, you want to talk to them the way they like to talk. And that's when you get better responses from them. What extroverts can do: talk less, lower the volume, be less disclosive. Don't expect an immediate answer. That's one of the things I learned in dealing with my introverted husband, is that if I'd ask him a question and stand there and stare at him waiting for an answer, I didn't get the response that I wanted. So I learned how to put the question out there, turn around and walk away. And when he was ready to talk to me, he would come and talk to me. And I usually got the answer that I wanted then. What can introverts do to be more effective with extroverts? Talk more, speak up, reveal some of your thoughts about things, and have an immediate answer if you possibly can. So we just need to flex a little bit to the other person's style, and that's what helps us connect better. And if you can't flex, just recognize that person is behaving the way they do because it totally makes sense to them, not because they're trying to drive you crazy. Next, sensing and intuition. This is how we take in information and the information that we trust. Sensors trust information that they can see, smell, taste, touch, hear. It's tangible. It's real. It's right in front of them. Intuitors trust their gut for the most part. They trust their hunches and their feelings about things. And that's one of the things that drive each other crazy. Sensors like facts and details. The more facts, the better. They trust facts. They trust a lot of facts. They like a lot of details. One of the things they tend to do is they demand factual information from you, and also they provide a lot of facts and details. This becomes a problem for intuitors. They're very practical and realistic people, but intuitors tend to think they're pessimists and downers because they're just a realist. They start at the beginning, take one step at a time. Well, doesn't everybody do that? No, intuitors just jump in and go all over the place. But sensors like things in sequential order. This, then this, then this, and that makes sense to them. They're very specific and literal when speaking, writing, and listening. That literalness is what drives intuitors crazy. I heard a great story about somebody who gave advice to someone, and that advice to this girl who a relationship hadn't worked out, the advice was just don't talk to her anymore. And so whenever that boy would see that girl, he would refuse to interact with her or even say hello. He would just turn around and walk away. He thought that was the advice that he had been given. Just don't talk to her anymore. Well, that's not what the person meant. The person meant don't get so involved in conversations that they become hurtful to you. But he didn't mean literally don't speak to her anymore. Sensors live in the present, dealing with the here and the now. So they're very focused on what's happening right now. Intuitors, not so much. And they prefer reality to fantasy. So one of the things, sensors tend not to like to brainstorm because it seems like a waste of time when you're coming up with all these fantastical ideas that will never happen. Well, that's what brainstorming is. And then you whittle it down to make it practical. But that kind of activity tends to agitate them because they think it's very impractical. Intuitors see patterns, possibilities, connections, and meanings in information. They read between the lines. So yeah, this is what the facts say, but there's more to the story than that. And they try to figure out what is in between the lines. They are the possibilities thing. They're constantly thinking of, we could do this, we could do that. So that's one of their gifts, is being able to come up with possibilities. They're conceptual and abstract. They're big picture people. They don't like details. Details make them anxious. and that they don't even see details a lot of times. I'm an intuitor and my husband's a sensor, and I brought home our groceries and he was helping me put them away, and he was putting the tofu away and he said, "Why did you buy expired tofu?" I said, "How do you know it expired?" And he said, "Because the expiration date says so." I didn't see the expiration date. I figure if the tofu's on the shelf, it's good to go. But that's what intuitors do, is that they just see the big picture and they don't see all of the details. And that's where they make their mistakes sometimes. Intuitors start anywhere and leap over basic steps. And when they're talking, they'll frequently jump into the middle of a story and then have to back up and tell you other parts of the story so that you'll understand what they're talking about. As I said, they speak and write in general metaphorical terms. Now, those metaphorical terms, they're trying to use language to paint a picture, and they don't exactly get the facts straight sometimes. So one of the things about intuitors is that they tend to exaggerate sometimes so that you'll get the idea of what they're talking about. So I had an intuitor that I was coaching, and she was having trouble with one of her coworkers. And we figured out she's an intuitor, he's a sensor, and that's one of the problems, because she would say things like, "We've done this a million times." And he would say, "We haven't done it a million times, we've done it twice." He thought she was lying, at the very least exaggerating about the situation. And she's trying to paint the picture, we've done this, we're good, we don't need to do it again. But that's the difficulty that they often have with each other. Sensors are very literal people, and if your words are not precise, then you're lying, perhaps. And with intuitors, they use their words figuratively so that you get the gist, and they become impatient with sensors when they question them or challenge them on their facts, because you know what I mean. You know what I'm trying to say. Stop being so literal. Intuitors live in the future, and as I said, possibilities. They're great at coming up with possibilities. They're always thinking, what's next? So it's tough for them to stay present and grounded in reality, because their mind is floating away to what's next? What could we do after this? What happens after this? I'm in Rotary, and we were doing a fundraiser, and we went to the Masonic Temple to see if it would be a good place for our fundraiser. And it was very obvious in checking out the space who were the sensors and who were the intuitors. The sensors looked around and saw the water spots on the ceiling, saw the cracked tile, saw the ugly chairs sitting over there, and that's what they focused on. The intuitor looked around and said, we could put the band there, we could put flowers here, we could put trees here, and the intuitor saw what could be. Sensors see what is, intuitors see what could be. Intuitors prefer imagination and ingenuity to reality. Reality is boring. And one of the things that happens with the possibilities is once they become reality, they're boring. So move on to the next possibility. Sensors like to work with the parts to see the overall design. So they're the ones who see the trees instead of the forest. They need to see all of the parts in order to get an idea of what the big picture is. They like set procedures, established routines, because it's efficient that way. And sensors really like efficiency. If you have a set procedure and a set way of doing things, you don't have to reinvent it all the time. You do it the same way over and over, and you can do it faster and faster. It's more efficient. Sensors hate it when things are not efficient. Well, unfortunately, intuitors are not very efficient people. So, for example, I'm an intuitor, I take care of our animals, husband's a sensor, and I brought the dog bowl into the kitchen in order to fill it with water and then take it back out on the porch. My husband said, "Why are you bringing the water bowl into the kitchen? There is a faucet right there on the porch." I said, "What difference does it make?" He said, "The faucet is closer. It's more efficient to fill up the bowl with the faucet instead of walking all the way into the kitchen." Well, walking all the way into the kitchen took 5 seconds. He said, "Also, when you are walking out of the kitchen, water is dripping from the bowl, possibly getting onto the floor is just more efficient filling up the water bowl outside." Well, he's right. But as an intuitor, who cares? Just get the job done. No, sensors care very much how the job gets done, and you need to do it the most efficient way. Sensors prefer practical, concrete problems and dislike theoretical or abstract problems. Intuitors read between the lines, and so sometimes there's more to the problem than presents itself to the sensor's eyes. Example, I once had a supervisor tell me, problem is Joe is late to work almost every day. And I said, I've talked with Joe, and Joe's father was in the military, and he told me one time that he really struggled with authoritarian, militaristic environments because of that relationship with his father. So I think the real problem is that Joe struggles with authority. Well, that drove the sensor crazy. No, the problem is Joe is late. Fix it. Sensors can seem materialistic and too literal to intuitive types. Now, the materialistic is not that they want a big mansion or a fancy car. Materialistic is if they can't see it, smell it, taste it, touch it, hear it. If it's not right in front of them, then it doesn't exist. And to intuitors, there's a whole other world besides what's right in front of you. So that's for the materialistic part. And of course, sensors need intuitors to balance them, and they tend to marry them as a result. Intuitors study the overall design to see how the parts fit. So again, they're big picture people, and that's what they like to focus on. They thrive on change, new ideas, and variety. They like to mix it up. Routine bores them. They get anxious with too much routine. They need to be doing lots of different things lots of times, and they like to change things up just because they're boring and they've been the same way. Example, in our house, I wanted to change the dining room. It's been this way for 7 years. It's boring. I'm bored with it. My husband says, you never eat in the dining room, so why do you care? Well, because I have to look at it every single day. I'm not going to spend money changing something that doesn't need to be fixed. Yeah, but I'm bored with it, and I just want, okay, so that's the discussion between sensors and intuitors. By the way, we have a new dining room. Intuitors prefer imaginative new solutions to problems, become impatient with details. As I said, our eyes glaze over and we go to our happy space when people talk about too many details. And they can seem impractical dreamers to sensor types because they come up with all these fantastical ideas that the sensor knows are impractical and can't happen. And that's one of the conflicts between the two, is that the intuitor comes up with this great idea and the sensor begins to tell them why it's not so great. And a lot of times it is not so great, but the intuitor doesn't think that and gets their feelings hurt and don't want to provide any ideas anymore. So intuitors need sensing for balance. We all do both, so we don't just fit all into one category, but we tend to have a preference. So how do you know what your preference is? Do you really like details and facts in order to feel good about the decisions that you make? Or do you trust your gut and go with hunches? That's one of the ways to determine the two. Because again, this is how we take in information and the information that we trust. Clashes, as I already told you. The intuitor is too much of a daydreamer and coming up with impractical ideas and always wants to change things up for the sensor. The sensor is too literal, a fuddy-duddy, a stick in the mud, likes routine for the intuitor. So what are some things that they can do? Well, one of the things, especially about brainstorming, Walt Disney came up with this one because he found that his creative team was clashing quite a bit. And he didn't realize it, but we realize it now, is because it was sensors and intuitors, and the intuitors would come up with ideas that the sensors would automatically just shoot down. And so they realized that was not a good idea. And so brainstorming and how you're supposed to do it follows this method because of that. You put all of the fantastical ideas out there without judgment. And then after all the ideas are out there, you begin to whittle them down until they make sense. And that's what you're supposed to do in brainstorming. Don't judge until all of the ideas are out there. And then you begin the whittling process to make them make sense. And that really does make sense. And my husband has learned how to do that with me. I think that we should put a gazebo in the backyard and a rock garden and a waterfall and all of this. Well, his idea of a backyard is a slab of concrete. So how do we meet in the middle? We look at my idea and we begin to whittle it down. The gazebo is kind of impractical because it could take up the entire backyard. Yeah, you're right. The rock garden will probably hurt the dog's paws, so we probably don't want to do that. Yeah, you're right. And with the waterfall, in order to put a water pipe in there, we'd have to tear out the concrete that we just put in. So that's probably not a great idea, right? Yeah, you're right. And so then we come up with something somewhere in the middle that makes both of us happy. And that is good decision making. You need both in order to be able to get the best result. And so, practical solutions, intuitors, be a little bit more realistic with your ideas and don't get your feelings hurt when people don't think they're great ideas. And sensors, you need to relax a little bit, especially with the money, and lighten up a little bit when it comes to routines and realize that a little variety, a little change is sometimes the thing that you need, especially in our ever changing world. Next set of preferences, thinking and feeling. Now, these words are bad words for this because people misunderstand these. This is how we make decisions. Thinkers make decisions based upon what is logical, analytical, and feelers make decisions based upon how it's going to impact people. But this is where the problem starts. Some people think that thinkers don't have feelings or that feelers don't think, and that is incorrect. Having said that, you can tell through communication style pretty much who's a thinker and who's a feeler, and you'll see why. Thinkers use logic to analyze problems, assess the pros and cons. As I said, when making decisions, what's logical? Let's make up a list of pros and cons. We have more pros and cons. Great, that's probably the right way to go. Well, that shouldn't be the end of the decision-making process, but it often is for thinkers. They focus on the facts and the principles of a situation in order to figure out what's the right decision. They're very good at analyzing a situation, stepping back from it and figuring out what's happening from an objective viewpoint, not getting themselves emotionally involved in the situation. They focus on problems and tasks, not on relationships, and they may not include the impacts on people or their emotions in their decision-making process, and that's how they make bad decisions. So these things about thinkers, they're very good at detaching themselves from a situation in order to look at it objectively. Well, as a result of that, they appear detached. They try to get their emotions out of a situation in order to see it objectively. Well, as a result of that, they appear unemotional. They don't take impacts on people into their decision-making process. Well, as a result of that, they appear uncaring. So all of these things that come very naturally to a thinker make them appear to be cold and rigid and uncaring. And sometimes that's true, but a lot of times it's not true. It's just how they're making their decisions. Feelers use their personal values to understand the situation. Values are very important to the feeler. And I was coaching one this morning who was telling me that something had happened at work and she did not feel valued as a result of that. I'm a thinker. I didn't understand why she was taking the situation personally, but that's what feelers do. And she felt that she was not being valued and her opinion was not being valued. And so therefore, that was a big problem for her. Feelers focus on the values of the group or the organization. They want what's best for the group and the organization. And sometimes they will sacrifice their own wants or feelings for what's best for the group. They're good at understanding people and their viewpoints. They're very empathetic and they're able to put themselves in other people's shoes and are able to say, well, I wouldn't like that to happen. And so they probably wouldn't like that to happen. They concentrate on relationships and harmony. They tend not to like conflict and they will avoid it if they possibly can. However, if you step on their toes when it comes to values or people they value or things they value, then they can rip your eyes out if they need to. They can become quite conflictive at that point. But for the most part, it's all about everybody being happy. And they may overlook logical consequences of individual decisions as a result of trying to make everybody happy. Thinkers take a long-term view, seeing things as an onlooker. And as I said, they detach from a situation. And as a thinker, I can feel that detachment happening in order to be able to try to observe the situation just from a logical perspective. They're good at spotting flaws and inconsistencies and stating them clearly. Yeah. If you're an extroverted thinker, you're probably especially good at spotting flaws and stating them clearly in public settings. And I discourage you from doing this. First of all, no one will like you. And second of all, people will think you're a bully. So thinkers need to, I mean, this is one of their talents, is that they can pick out flaws very easily from products or events or what have you. So, for example, if a subordinate had a project that contained 100 components to it and only one was flawed, that's what the thinker would see immediately. And that's what the thinker would focus on and talk about, is the one thing out of 100 that was wrong. Now, a feeler, on the other hand, would see all of the things that were right and would focus on the things that were right and maybe mention the thing that was wrong in a very gentle, tactful way. When required, thinkers can reprimand or fire people. Again, they can fire their mom if they have to because they know it's the logical thing to do. They can make really tough decisions, and it seems like they're not caring about the impact those decisions have on people. And sometimes that is not part of their thought process. They're just thinking about what is the most logical. They believe fairness, justice, and equitability are very important. Well, feelers do too, but here's one of the things: feelers and thinkers have a different idea of what's fair. For a thinker, what's fair is that everybody plays by the same rules. For a feeler, what's fair is what is appropriate for that person. And when you're in human resources or in a supervisory position, that's one of the things that makes supervisors feel or appear uncaring, or HR people uncaring, because we need to make sure that everybody plays by the same rules as much as possible. Inconsistency breeds contempt, and it also breeds discrimination claims. But with feelers, that may seem really cold, that you're not taking into consideration people's feelings and circumstances when making decisions about them. They may seem cold and detached to feeling types. As I said, they can even seem cold and detached to some thinking types. And they need feeling for balance so that they understand the impact on people. Feelers take an immediate and personal view of situations. So as something's happening, feelers step into the situation where thinkers step back from the situation. Feelers involve themselves in the situation. And if this were happening to me, how would I feel about it? You can usually tell who is a thinker and who is a feeler by this one. Feelers like to show appreciation and caring for others. They tend to be very warm people, very compassionate, sympathetic. They are complimentary. And thinkers, not so much. So this is one of the ways that you can tell through communication styles. They have difficulty telling people unpleasant things, and sometimes they'll avoid it altogether. They believe fairness means treating each individual as a whole person, as I said before. And so let me give you a little bit more of an example of that. Let's say that all of your employees have a 1-hour lunch break, but one of your employees lives all the way across town from your organization, and they have a diabetic dog who requires an insulin injection in the middle of the day. And so in order to drive all the way across town, give the insulin injection, and drive all the way back, that eats up their entire hour of lunch. And so a feeler might say, well, they need to have some lunchtime, and so maybe we'll adjust their lunch hours so that they get a little bit more time because of what's happening with their dog and their responsibility there. Where a thinker would go, everybody gets an hour, and everybody has to play by the rules. So that's how decisions are made, taking people's individual needs into account. They may seem overly emotional and irrational to thinking types because feelers can appear overly emotional to thinkers a lot of times. because they get so involved personally with the situation, and because they sometimes express their emotions more than thinkers do. And irrational to the thinking types. Again, if thinkers are making decisions based upon what is logical, and a feeler is saying, yes, but Robin's got her diabetic dog, and the thinker think that that's an irrational decision. We can't make decisions that way. So that's some of the conflict. We all use thinking and we all use feeling. And it's not to say that thinkers don't have feelings, and it's not to say that feelers don't think. We all do the same. We all care about people. We all can be analytical, all of that. But it's how you like to make decisions. Thinkers like to make decisions and gravitate toward making decisions simply based upon what's the most logical thing to do. And feelers take people into account and want to make people happy when making decisions. So what's the clash? As I said, feelers can appear detached, uncaring, cold, harsh, overly critical. And feelers to thinkers can appear overly dramatic, overly emotional, taking things personally, that the thinker doesn't understand why you're taking this personally, avoiding conflict, being overly sympathetic, etc. So, what is the solution? Thinkers need to remember that in their decisions, people are involved. And when people are involved, people, if it's happening to them, will take things personally. So if it's happening to me personally, I am going to take it personally. And the thinker forgets that sometimes. And so they need to take people's feelings into account. They need to try not to be as harsh and critical, to focus on what's going well as what needs to be improved upon. And feelers, in order to get along better with thinkers, need to not take things so personally, to realize that if a thinker is criticizing them, it means that they care about them. A lack of criticism from a thinker means they don't care about you. That to be less dramatic, less emotional when it comes to thinkers. So again, adopting the other person's personality style, their communication style, gets better responses from them. And so if you are a feeler and you tend to be very enthusiastic and personable and warm, and you're dealing with a thinker and you're getting no reaction from them when you're doing that, that's their cue to you. Bring it down. I don't want a lot of emotion. I don't want a lot of chit chat. By the same token, if you're a thinker and you're dealing with somebody who is very compassionate and warm and chit-chatty, and that's not your style, you probably need to bring it up a little bit, have a little bit more emotion, disclose a little bit more information in order to connect with them. Now, why would you want to do that? In order to get better responses from people. That's the reason that we communicate and interact with each other at all, is to get our needs met through other people. When you are dealing with people, if you speak their language, they're more than likely going to give you what you need. So that's why we do it. Finally, judging and perceiving. This one's a little easier to understand. So if you're having trouble with, I don't know if I'm a sensor, an intuitor, or a thinker, or a feeler, I really can't tell. Usually this one is pretty easy to understand. What the definition is our attitude toward the external world and how we orient ourselves to it. Well, what does that mean? This means how we approach the world. Judgers want to organize it and plan it and stick to the plan. Perceivers want to jump in and see what happens. Judgers like to make plans and follow them. If you're a judger, you've probably got your weekend all planned out. You've probably got your to-do list all ready to go. And when you are doing things on your to-do list, you like to mark them off, and they give you a great deal of satisfaction in marking them off. And if you do something that's not on the to-do list, you'll probably put it on there so that you can mark it off, because that gives you a great sense of satisfaction. Perceivers don't have to-do lists for the most part. Judgers like to get things settled and finished. They make decisions pretty quickly. And this becomes a problem for them a lot of times, because they make that decision and then they don't want to change their mind, even when new information comes in. So they like to get things done and settled. Let's not talk about it again. It's done. We're done. They like environments with structure and clear limits. Now, if you're a censored judger, you really like your standard operating procedures, your employee handbook, your job descriptions, your organizational charts. All of those things really make your world go round. Perceivers don't care about any of that stuff. Judges enjoy being decisive and organizing other people. They like to tell other people what to do. And so sometimes they appear bossy. And if they're dealing with a perceiver, the perceiver is not going to do what you tell them to do simply because they don't want to. They handle deadlines and time limits comfortably because if you say this is due 365 days from today, they'll have a little timeline on, well, next week I need to have this done, and the week after that I need to have this done, and the week after that I need to have this done. And they'll have it all planned out throughout the entire year, and they'll be done a week ahead of time because they hate last minute rushes. That provides them with a lot of anxiety, this last minute stuff. Perceivers thrive on the last minute stuff. Perceivers like to respond resourcefully to changing situations. So a perceiver might have a plan, but if their boss walks in and says, okay, put that away, this is what you're doing, they get excited about that. Judgers hate that. Now I need to stick to the plan. But perceivers love, here's something new, so put this away. They like to leave things open, gather more information. They don't like making decisions before they feel they need to make a decision. So I'm a perceiver, and my friends who know that about me know that I'm not going to make plans way ahead of time. If somebody says to me today, would you like to go out to lunch on Sunday? Sure. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Don't make me decide where I want to go today. I don't know how I'm going to feel on Sunday. So I can make a plan to meet, but I can't go any further than that. That just gives perceivers a headache. They like environments that are flexible. They dislike rules and limits. Perceivers are the bane of HR professionals and supervisors because they don't play by the rules. They disregard the rules. They don't even know that there are rules. They may not like making decisions even when pressed, as I said before, and they tend to think there's plenty of time to do things, so they end up rushing in order to complete things. Perceivers are almost always late to situations, to events, because they think there's plenty of time to get there. It only takes 5 minutes to get across town, and I know that I'm going to hit every green light, so it'll all be fine. So they're surprised when things don't work out exactly as they should. Judges like getting to the bottom line, deciding, and as I said, once they've made that decision, they don't want to revisit it. They dislike being interrupted on a project, even for a more urgent one. They like to follow the plan. They like to work on one thing at a time. By the way, lots of research has said this is the best way to do it. Multitasking is really inefficient. So for those of us perceivers who like to jump around to stuff, that really is not the most efficient way of doing it. So the judges win on this one. Having one project, finish that project, and then move on to something else. They may make decisions too quickly or cling to a plan because they refuse to see additional information once they've made that plan. They may not notice new things that need to be done. As I said, they may seem rigid, demanding, and inflexible to perceiving types because we've got a better idea, we've got a better plan. Nope, we're sticking to the plan. And they need perceiving for balance, and so you guessed it, they tend to marry them. Perceivers want to explore all the options before deciding. And so they don't want to jump to something too quickly. They want to look around. They want to keep things open. They may start too many projects and have difficulty finishing them. Perceivers get really excited about new shiny objects. And then if another new shiny object comes along, they forget the old one. And so it's one of the things with judgers is the judger motto is if you're going to start something, you finish it. Well, the perceiver doesn't understand that because if something better comes along, why am I finishing something that's boring and old? Judgers will read a book for 300 pages that they've hated from page 1 because when you start it, you finish it. Perceivers are not going to spend time reading something that they're not enjoying. I give you a chapter or 2 chapters, and if you can't grab my interest by then, you're done. And so that's how they conflict sometimes. My father's a perceiver, and he redid his backyard into one big giant garden. And it was a beautiful garden, vegetables and flowers and waterfall and all sorts of stuff going on in that garden. It was just gorgeous. Now it's a wasteland. And so why did he devote all that time and energy and money into this garden and then let it go to the wayside? Because something newer and shinier came along that grabbed his interest. And that garden no longer means anything because something else is more important. That's a perceiver. They may spontaneously change plans. So, okay, I'll go along with your plan, but this one is better. And so now I'm not committed to that plan anymore. And they seem disorganized and irresponsible to judging types. And I've got to tell one of my favorite stories here. My husband and I are both in Rotary, different ones. And I was president of my Rotary a couple of years ago. The club sends the president, the incoming president, to the Rotary International Convention. And my convention, the year that I was incoming, was in Bangkok. So my husband said, all right, this is your deal. And so you make the convention registration, you make the hotel registration, and I'll take care of the airline stuff. And so I did. I made the registrations, and I was going to print out my registration material before we left, but I ran out of time. And so I knew we'd figure it out once we got there. So we got to Bangkok, to the hotel, and my husband said, where is the convention? And I said, it's here somewhere. And he said, in the hotel? And I said, no, it's in Bangkok somewhere. All right, if you're a judger, you're sighing just like he did. And I said, well, figure it out. This hotel's filled with Rotarians. We'll just ask one. So one was walking by. Excuse me, Mr. Rotarian, where is the convention? Oh, all you have to do is go down on the street corner and a bus will come by every 15 minutes, pick you up, take you out to the convention. And I turned to my husband and I said, see, we figured it out. He wasn't happy with that. And so we got to the convention, and I didn't have my convention material. And after standing in line for 45 minutes at the registration desk, I was asked for my convention material, and I said, I don't have it. And they said, well, then stand in line over there. My husband's response was, well, 15 minutes later, we were all good to go. See, it all worked out. It always does. So that type of behavior comes naturally to me and works very well for me. But to a judger, that seems really disorganized and irresponsible. We all make plans and we all can be spontaneous, but we tend to have a preference for one or the other. The clash is easy to see. Judgers are too rigid for perceivers. They stick to the plan when the plan is no longer a good one. But perceivers are irresponsible and have no plan for the judgers. So the practical solution, if you are a judger dealing with a perceiver, try to lighten it up and be a little bit more flexible and go with the flow. And if you are a perceiver dealing with a judger, print up your registration material before you fly halfway around the world. So here are our preferences. You're either an E or an I, an S or an N, that's for intuitor, thinker or feeler, J or a P. And when you put all of those things together, it is one of 16 personality types. And all of them are greater than just the sum of their parts. For example, an extroverted, intuitor, thinker, perceiver, it's more when you put it all together than just those four things. It creates its own distinct personality style that drives other people crazy. And what can we do about that? Well, let's remember, people behave in ways that totally make sense to them. And again, me flying halfway around the world without my registration material totally makes sense to me because I know when I get there, all I have to do is get on a computer and it'll be right there. But that doesn't work for other people. When we understand why people behave the way they do, we can be more understanding of our differences and understanding how introverts like to communicate, how sensors like to receive information, how thinkers like to make their decisions, and how judgers like to plan things. All of those things have helped me understand how to interact better with them. We can make small adjustments in our behavior to get along better with others. We don't have to make sweeping changes to our personality style. It's just that when we're dealing with people who like to do things different than we do, if we make small adjustments, then probably we can get along better with them. And when we get along, more work gets done. Yay! That's what it's all about. So thank you very much for joining today's webinar. And I do provide workshops on this information. People are able to take an online assessment and to get a report that tells them more about themselves and go into numerous hours of how we can get along better with people. So if you're interested in that, just let me know. Thanks for joining me. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, and we'll see you next time.